Hey everyone, something important I kind of want to talk to you guys about before we get into the normal conversation. And I had to write this out so that I kind of cover all the main points I want to convey to everybody. So before we get into the conversation, I wanted to ask something of you all. Ron and Mike, they give you a lot of the learning content. And Rich, who will soon be back with us, thank goodness, glad to have him back. Rich and I give you a lot of the mission, the so what do we do now portion to empower you guys with ideas and concepts and challenges as to how to engage your world more meaningfully with this content. So here's a new request. And given the topic we discuss, this should really come as no surprise. However, we in the West have become so materialistic, naturalistic in our worldview, we simply miss the not so obvious, unseen realm as it pertains to spiritual warfare that's going on around us all the time. So folks, the enemy, he wants you to remain blind and ignorant to their methods, tactics, and subversive mission to undermining any godly purpose in your life, particularly if it's casting a light onto their nefarious activity. The enemy would be happy for their existence to remain a subconscious afterthought in your prayer life and in your daily walk. But friends, I'm here to tell you the enemy is very, very active. And the enemy started working overtime in the lives of several of us on this podcast, sowing seeds of chaos in various aspects of our lives in an attempt to derail the mission of the podcast. Medical issues to incapacitate us, familial, relational issues to sidetrack us or completely undermine our purpose of mission. Friends, if you've been following Dr. Heiser's work and now this podcast for any length of time, you should be confident that the battle is real. And as we educate and disciple you on the activity of the spiritual realm and to purpose ourselves to shine God's light into dark spaces of this world, the enemy is going to respond in force. And in our cases, the enemy was preemptively attacking. So we need your prayers. We need your prayer covering, not just toward the podcast, but towards all dimensions of our personal lives so that we're fully capable and engaged to give you the best for the podcast. So some of you are probably already thinking of Ephesians 6, verses 10 through 13. And I'm going to read it for you here in the ESV, and then I'm going to pivot to the Amplified, and I'll tell you why. So in the ESV, Ephesians 6:10, finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you'll be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. Now, I'm going to reread this in the Amplified version because it really draws some things out. I really like how the Amplified expounds on some of the key words and captures the meaning and intent of it. So here it is again, Ephesians 6, starting verse 10. In conclusion, be strong in the Lord. Draw your strength from him and be empowered through your union with him, and in the power of his boundless might. Put on the full armor of God, for his precepts are like the splendid armor of a heavily armored soldier, so that you may be able to successfully stand up against all the schemes and the strategies and the deceits of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, contending only with physical opponents, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly supernatural places. Therefore, Put on the complete armor of God so that you will be able to successfully resist and stand your ground in the evil day of danger. And having done everything that the crisis demands, to stand firm in your place, fully prepared, immovable, victorious. I really like that last part. So what we're talking about right now, folks, is we need your prayer regarding that middle portion, because the enemy has schemes and strategies and deceits lined up for you and particularly for us. And the thing is if we're going out, if we're going to be shedding light on the unseen realm, everyone likes the good guys, everyone likes the angels, but we're not so worried about them. They're already on our side. We're preaching to the choir about that. We're not worried about that. We have to address the dark forces, the dark stuff that's going on in our world, because that's how we're to bring light to chaos. We're to bring order to chaos, light to darkness. And we're contending against that. So if the Spirit impresses upon you to bind and loose, and some of you are already there as well, then by all means be led in wisdom and power and authority. Now, some of you guys maybe you're early in your Christian walk and you just don't know power and authority. What kind of power and authority do I have? Let me explain, because it's all over the Bible and I can't touch on everything right here, but here's some really, really key features. 2 Timothy 1:7 in the ESV says, "For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control." Again, I'm going to read this in the Amplified because I like the impact of it. "For God did not give us a spirit of timidity or cowardice or fear, but he has given us a spirit of power and of love and of sound judgment and personal discipline, abilities that result in a calm, well-balanced mind and self-control." I like that. He didn't give us a spirit of timidity or cowardice or fear. He didn't. That's not who you are. That's not who you are in Christ. I'm going to bring it up a level. We, as Christians, as battle-armored Christians, if you go back to Ephesians 6, if you read after verse 13, you need to read that. You need to read your armor, and you need to understand your armor and why it is. And I hope to get into the sandals of peace. That sounds like a very weak, a very passive piece of equipment, but it's not. I've been kind of going through that for the past couple of weeks, and God's just been kind of like giving me some thoughts and ideas on it, and it's quite powerful. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that you have the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. You are now God's cosmic geography. And wherever you walk, wherever those feet, wherever those sandals take you, you're taking that piece, you're taking that cosmic geography with you. But you aren't just walking in there with your sandals, are you? No, you got a lot of other equipment on you. So let's get back to this. We, as battle-armored Christians, need to operate from a position of power and authority. Ephesians 6 above goes on to talk about the armor and the weapons we have. But do you think the God of the universe is going to equip his family so poorly for spiritual combat? To put it in earthly terms, the U.S. military is unquestionably the most well-equipped, armored, and weaponized military the world has ever known throughout all history, period. Now, let me deliver this news to you. Wherever you are, whether you're in America or not, and man, I love you guys that are overseas. I want to meet all of y'all. Seriously. Ephesians 2, verses 4 through 8 in the ESV. But verse 6 is what we're going to focus on. Usually verse 7 and verse 8, they get a lot of the attention. But in this context that we're talking about now, verse 6, this is where we're going to get to power and authority. But starting in verse 4, but God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love in which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved. Here's verse 6. Key in on this. And raised us up with him, that is Jesus, and seated us with him in heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the coming ages he may show the immeasurable riches of his grace and kindness toward us in Christ Jesus. For by grace you've been saved through faith. And this is not of your own doing, it is the gift of God. Did you catch that in verse 6? Do you catch the authority that you have as a Christ follower, as a believer? Because you know you're adopted into the family, right? You were raised up with him, and God has seated us with Christ in heavenly places. Now I'm going to bring this back to like our earthly realm, because it's kind of like on earth as it is in heaven, sort of like they're kind of, sometimes they're mirror images of it. But who gets to sit, not stand, who gets to sit next to the king in any culture throughout history? Only the very close family. Only the closest of family gets to sit next to the king. Is it possible the creator of the universe, who considers you the righteousness of Christ and worthy to be seated with him in heavenly places, where the real seat of power and authority are, by the way, is it possible he has equipped you, the believer, you, the listener of this podcast right now, you that's in their car listening, or at the gym, or taking a walk, or winding down in your bed for the evening? Is it possible he's given you the spiritual tools you need to engage the enemy? And not just react defensively to the enemy's attacks, because as Christians, we're just so used to just kind of like taking a beating. We're just in the media, in the public sphere, we're always taking a beating. Folks, it's never changed. It's always been that way. Always been that way. This is the world we're in. We are not of the world. We are in it, but we're not of it. So the world's going to come after you. It's always come after you, and it will always do so. The power of Christ is not in a defensive stance. It is not a defensive reaction to that, because there's no power in that. Sometimes we do have to. Sometimes, yes, we got to react and stand defensively on some things. But for most part, not really. It's the power's in the word. The power isn't in us. And you don't have to defend the truth. The truth just is. The truth doesn't need defense. So you're not to react defensively to the enemy's attacks, but go on the offensive. Matthew 6:18 says, the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. The gates are not an offensive weapon. It's talking about the gates of hell. Gates, you don't attack an army with gates. In this verse, Jesus is referring to Christ believers offensively storming the gates of hell and redeeming the lost and creating disciples of them in Christ Jesus. That's offensive in nature. You are to storm the gates of hell. So our earnest request of you, O Christian, armored and equipped with power and authority, who's given not a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and self-control. Our request is to engage in this battle with us and for us. We need your prayers. Our health and our family need your prayers. Being neutral is not an option. The enemy doesn't even consider neutrality on the table. So you better engage, or you're already losing. Speaking of losing, now's a good time to pause the podcast for a few minutes and pray. Pray with the authority that's been given to you as an heir of Christ. Bind the enemy. Loose people from the grip of the enemy. Please continue to keep us and our families in your prayers. Ron, Mike, Rich, Jorge and his entire team, and myself, Mel. Keep us in your prayers now, a year from now, 5, 10 years from now. We need the protection your prayers enact in heavenly spaces to have an earthly impact in our lives. So please take a moment, and then we'll start the show. Really appreciate you guys. Love you all. Talk to y'all later. Hello, everyone. This is the other half of DCW. Mel, as you can see, I am missing someone, either here or here, wherever he would be. Rich has been going through some medical issues for a while. He's really been struggling with them, and he's been a real trooper, and he's been fighting through them. But fairly recently, it's just become too much for him, and the stress of the medical issues and other things that he's dealing with have just become too great. And he thought he needed to take some time away just to kind of focus on getting better. And I want him to. I miss him dearly. I love his camaraderie. I love bouncing things off of him. I love his energy and his spirit. And he's like a go-getter for me, and I love it. But I want him to get better. It's really important for him to get better, and we hope to see him back in future episodes. But for right now, I'm going to be flying solo. So y'all pray for me, and pray that I do this well, and that I represent things well, and I give you guys the kind of content and the kind of challenges that we really need for this kind of thing. So with that, let's keep Richard in your prayers. Please do. And you know what? It would be really cool in the comment section, if you guys want to leave like a short prayer for him, please do that. I'd love for him to look at them and just see that people are praying for him. He's a great guy and needs it. Pray for him and his family. And we're going to be doing some other things in the comment section here, and I'm going to lead you to it. We like your comments. I like the engagement. We like the interaction. And so there's some things I want to hear from you guys, because I want us to interact, and I want other people reading things to get other perspectives. Instead of us just being heard, I also want us ourselves to read thoughts and perspectives of other people, because we're all parts of the body, and the hand doesn't do what the foot do, and the ear doesn't do what the mouth does. So we need to learn from these different perspectives. So with that, the mission continues. Again, we've kind of said the purpose of these bonus drops is different than what you're doing with Ron and Mike. I think that stuff is very, very purposeful, very useful. Of course, that's what we're all here for. That's great. Loved listening to Dr. Michael Heiser and the things he was talking about, and I like learning that. But at the same time, I know that he wanted us to move things forward in a more proactive way. And so we're getting lots of learning with the content that Mike and Ron are giving us. But at some point, that learning needs to become doing. And as Mike Heiser used to say, the greatest form of warfare, of spiritual warfare, is making disciples. I love that phrase. That's actually really good. A lot of us, prayer, sure, we think of that. That is a seriously a great weapon of our warfare. But making disciples, can you imagine? It's not just me praying. It's another person praying, and then that person's making disciples, and it's more people praying, and so on. It's like a good pyramid scheme, right? It's like a good multi-level marketing scheme. So with that, the purpose of this, really the whole podcast and even this content on this side of what I'm doing, and myself and Rich have been doing, is not to immortalize Dr. Mike Heiser or create some sort of denomination. That's not what it's about. This is non-denominational content, and I don't mean that in the non-denominational church sense. I mean, it's just in the Bible. These are just biblical facts. This is how the ancient people interacted with their Bible, and that's what we're dealing with, regardless of denomination, Episcopalian, Methodist, Lutheran, Baptist, Church of Christ, Catholic. It's in there. It's in there for us to work with and to wrestle with and to figure out what's going on. What do we need to do with this? So we had heard some people mention, the denomination, like we're trying to make another denomination. No, not at all. This is just biblical knowledge that every denomination can incorporate. I understand to some degree the evolution of denominations. I understand, the need when they came about, but we should not let our denominations filter our understanding of the Bible, but rather the other way around. The Bible is the beginning filter. Everything else comes after that. With that, you're going to hear other concepts and ideas that are related, but may not exactly be in line with Dr. Mike Heiser's thoughts. I've had some really good discussions with Dr. Ron Johnson, and he's got some different views than Dr. Mike Heiser. He even talks about him on the podcast already. I like that. I like hearing other views. Doesn't necessarily mean that one guy's wrong and one guy's right. We may not know on this side of heaven, quite frankly. But it's good to have these other ideas that, these are other possibilities that can actually kind of work out and play. It's not a salvation issue. It's just a good kind of mental content to have going on. So we should never hang our entire theology on that of one man. We simply have to look at Islam and Muhammad, or the LDS Church and Joseph Smith for that. God bless them. I hope they really kind of will wake some of them up to see the reality and the truth of it. But yes, whenever one man says he has all of the truth, it's a little dangerous. It's easy to see the error from this side. They aren't encouraged to question nor think critically about their faith, as it shows either disrespect or lack of faith. Like the Mormons, if they question, they feel like they don't have the faith, and they're a little bit ashamed into having those questions. And Islam, it's a lack of respect. You just don't question, you kind of move forward with it. But that's not the way things are. Even the Bereans were talked about as being considered highly honored because they wanted to search the scriptures to see if those things were true. They wanted to look. They wanted to research that. That's how we want to think of this. Even Dr. Heiser stated, none of these ideas were original to him. He is merely connecting the dots of the various data points. So Dr. Heiser gave us a pretty good number of data points to digest. And as he stood on the shoulders of giants that developed this knowledge that he's provided to us, let's let him take place among the giants of the past so that we may stand on his shoulders and those of others, Dr. Ron Johnson, Mike Chu, so that we can stand on their shoulders and we can see just a little bit further, and our understanding becomes a bit greater. That's what this whole thing is about. Maybe someone listening will even become one of those giants someday. I think that's a pretty cool idea. Maybe more than a few of you. I certainly hope. I certainly hope some of you are really spurred on to this. That's an exciting idea, exciting thought. So the greater purpose of these bonus episodes are to have discussions regarding how people have had impact on the world around them, and more specifically, the other imagers, believing or otherwise, because remember, they're all imagers, whether they believe or not. They're all made in God's image. And how their understanding of the divine realm helped them to be more effective in discipleship, in making other disciples, or just reaching out to other people. Again, we're going to go back to the mission of making disciples as the greatest form of spiritual warfare. Being neutral, it's not an option. By sitting on the bench, you are passively choosing to move the other direction. That bench you're sitting on, in fact, is moving. It is not static. And it's not moving in a beneficial direction. So not making a decision is, in fact, making a decision. James chapter 1, 22 through 25. This is the Amplified version. Admittedly, a lot of times I like the Amplified version because I like how it expounds on some of the contextual aspects of the verse. So you're going to hear some of that in some of these verses I'm reading. But prove yourselves doers of the word, actively and continually obeying God's precepts, and not merely listeners who hear the word but fail to internalize its meaning, deluding yourselves by unsound reasoning contrary to the truth. For if anyone only listens to the word without obeying it, he is like a man who looks very carefully at his natural face in a mirror. For once he has looked at himself and gone away, he immediately forgets what he looked like. But he who looks carefully into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and faithfully abides by it, not having become a careless listener who forgets, but an active doer who obeys, he will be blessed and favored by God in what he does in his life of obedience. You hear that over and over. Doers. Here's another one, James 1:27. Pure and unblemished religion, as it is expressed in outward acts, in the sight of our God and Father is this, to visit and look after the fatherless and the widows in their distress, and to keep oneself uncontaminated by the secular world. I like James. He's very challenging. He makes you be introspective. And it would stand to reason. I mean, he was Jesus' brother, right? This guy grew up with him. He couldn't have spent that much time with him and some of that not rubbed off on him. And, he wasn't there with the disciples, but he was after the resurrection, clearly. But James is very matter of fact. He gets straight to the point. So how do we do this? How do we put this knowledge into action? How do we make disciples? The answers are both easy and kind of complicated, or layered, maybe is another better word for it. God has given each of us giftings for just such a purpose. And then God gives us opportunities for us to move in those giftings, to use those gifts in a manner that complements the skills that we have. Sometimes these opportunities can align with our giftings, and sometimes it kind of challenges them. Maybe it's an affront to them. And sometimes they are to give us the opportunity to move in a new way. Maybe it's a new gifting we've never moved in before. Maybe it's something he wants to develop, and maybe it's been there, but it's just never been drawn out. Maybe we've been afraid of it. Also, God moves in the mundane. This is something Dr. Heiser said a lot. He does a lot of his work in just the mundane, everyday things. God uses 10,000 micro interactions every day to move mountains. Of course, the miraculous, the divine interventions are what we prefer to see. because we see an immediate action. It's just that mountain, metaphorical mountain was removed because the change is immediate and it's clearly measurable. The immediate feedback regarding what we think is our effort, something we did. But this is the exception. It's not the rule. If God always moved in the miraculous, would the choice to be a believer really be as genuine? Would we really be seekers of God as opposed to spectators of him? I think that's a bigger deal. To be willing to move in the mundane, the 10,000 micro interactions, the 10,000 micro movements. So here's where I said we're going to do some interaction in the comment section. So for these episodes, I do want them to be interactive, like I said, in the sense that you've had an impressionable experience related to this topic. I want you to write in the comment section so others might learn. Again, it's not just for you to be heard, it's so that others might learn. As it pertains to what I was just talking about, tell me about a time you thought you were simply doing the mundane and you were later able to see how God used that little micro interaction to kind of steer that big ship in the right direction. Start your comment in all caps so we know what topic, because there's going to be other topics I'm going to ask you about. So in front of your comment, in all caps, put the word mundane, mundane, and then tell your story, because there will be other topics we want to categorize with comments. So we need to play the long game. As Paul talked about, this is a race called life in 1 Corinthians 9:24-27, focusing more specifically on the discipline of training, specifically calling it strict training. And it is targeted and purposeful. You are not running aimlessly. Every day you wake up, it is both training day and game day in different aspects of your life. Some days when I get up, there are certain parts of my life that it's just training. It's just I'm doing a certain routine. But I can be practicing a thing, a life lesson, a skill that I need, a discipline that I need. But then in other aspects, I'm already being challenged. Like it's in my face. In other aspects of my life, it is game day. And all of those skills, all of those things I've done in the past, they are coming to the forefront to help me address that thing that I'm going through that day. So you are training for that which you have yet to encounter, and it is game day for the race or the fight you're currently engaged in. Meanwhile, you can be a cog in the wheel of those 10,000 movements. You guys understand, there may be people from a different country regarding when I say cog in a wheel. So I think of the gears in a watch. You have those gears that kind of go together. You are one of these. These are called the cogs, each one of these little things, these little teeth. We are a cog in the wheel of these 10,000 movements. Sometimes you're going to be the very first cog. You're going to be the impetus to start movement in something. You may be the actual person that creates movement in that other person's mind. That's what an honor. How cool is that for you? And sometimes you'll be the final cog that gets to see the harvest of all the effort of all of the previous cogs. Also, what an honor. You get to see the fruits of your labor, but again, it isn't just yours. It's the 10,000 people that came before you, or the 10,000 micro interactions for maybe 100 people. Who knows? But most often, you're going to be somewhere in between. You're going to be somewhere in the middle. I think the Spirit often, if not always, cues us in when it's one of these moments. If our hearts are tuned to listening to the Spirit, we can hear, hey, go do this for that person. Hey, give a word of encouragement to her. Hey, I want you to encourage him. Hey, they have a need. I'd like for you to meet that. This gives us the opportunity to really be purposeful about these interactions. So again, comment section. And this is not to pat yourself on the back. Oftentimes the scripture says, when you give with your left hand, don't let your right hand know what you're doing. So tell me of a time God impressed upon you that you were actively being a cog in the wheel, just one small iterative step towards someone else's redemption. In a holistic sense, it could be towards salvation, it could be towards bringing them back, or just really helping them move in a manner that God wanted them to move. So even though it seemed like this thing that you were doing was insignificant, tell us a time when God kind of impressed upon you that you were being a cog. Again, in the comment section, start with the phrase cog, all caps, COG, and then tell us your story. So this is something that we kind of went over during the live cast, and I kind of drew upon this book, and I'm going to go back to it because in our sense of doing, we want to figure out, how does all this stuff that we're learning relate to discipleship in the real world? And your home is your first mission field. Your home, where you live, your immediate family, that's your first mission field. Maybe your workplace or your social circle, that's your second mission field. So something that we talked about, that I discussed during our live cast, more specifically had to do with how missionaries in the past have come across sort of divine counsel worldview type topics, but in rather unexpected ways. And I'm going to go over a couple of those here in a little bit. But I want you guys to understand, first and foremost, that your mission field is not necessarily overseas. That doesn't mean, I think that's what most Americans, Westerners tend to think when they think of missionary work, is I'm going to somewhere overseas. It can be, and that's great. But daily, every day, your mission field is your home. It is your immediate family. That is who your mission field is. And then from there, it's your social circle. And then from there, it kind of broadens. And then if you feel so inclined to go do overseas work, great. But in all these senses, what I want to show you is that I'm going to show you some really big kind of sort of macro examples of how God prepared a people in advance for the work that they were going to be moving in. And the reason why I say that is because God is going to also do the same for you. He's going to do it daily. And it's not all on you. I know we tend to think this is all on me. I have to do this right. But when you start thinking that way, you're going to mess it up because it becomes all about you. You need to drop in. You need to drop these little nuggets of truth, these little nuggets of challenges to them, and then just kind of back off and let God do some work, and give someone else, give another cog in the wheel an opportunity, right? So with that, I'm going to pivot to this book that I read from in the live cast. And again, my buddy Rich kind of gave this to me and says, "Hey, you got to read this." So it's this book, Eternity in Their Hearts. Maybe it's showing backwards. It's by Don Richardson. So obviously Machu Picchu right here, but this does not. These are a bunch of stories that take place all over the world. So he collected a bunch of stories from missionaries that have had these experiences going to different places, very historical. And so I'm just going to cover a few of them. I'm going to read you some stories, just a few pages at a time, and we're going to talk. I'm going to ask some questions, drop some thoughts, And then again, feel free to drop some of your own thoughts in here. So this first one we're going to talk about is regarding the Santal people of India. And this was, there was a Norwegian missionary named Lars Skrefsrud and his Danish colleague Hans Borresen. I may be saying those wrong. I'm so sorry. This is circa 1867. So let me just read a few pages for you to give you some context. So in 1867, a bearded Norwegian missionary named Lars Skrefsrud and his Danish colleague, a layman named Hans Borresen, found 2.5 million people called the Santal living in a region north of Calcutta, India. Skrefsrud soon proved himself an amazing linguist. He quickly became so fluent in Santal that people came from miles around just to hear a foreigner speak their language so well. As soon as possible, Skrefsrud began proclaiming the gospel to the Santal. Naturally, he wondered how many years it would take before the Santal people, until then so far removed from Jewish or Christian influences, would even show interest in the gospel, let alone open their hearts to it. To Skrefsrud's utter amazement, the Santal were electrified almost at once by the gospel message. At length, he heard Santal sages, including one named Kulian, exclaim, "What the stranger is saying must mean that Thakur Jiu has not forgotten us after all this time." Skrefsrud caught his breath in astonishment. Thakur was a Santal word meaning genuine. Jiu meant God. The genuine God? Clearly, Skrefsrud was not introducing a new concept by talking about one supreme God. Santal sages politely brushed aside the terminology he had been using for God and insisted that Thakur Jiu was the right name to use. That name, obviously, had been on Santal lips for a very long time. "How do you know about Thakur Jiu?" Skrefsrud asked, a little disappointed perhaps. "Our forefathers knew him long ago," the Santal replied, beaming. "Very well," Skrefsrud continued. "I have a second question. Since you know about Thakur Jiu, why don't you worship him instead of the sun, or worse yet, the demons?" Santal faces around him grew wistful. "That," they responded, "is the bad news." Then the Santal sage named Kulian stepped forward and said, "Let me tell you our story from the very beginning." Not only Skrefsrud's, but the entire gathering of younger Santal fell silent as Kulian, an esteemed elder, spun out a story that stirred the dust on eons of Santal oral tradition. Long, long ago, according to Kulian, Thakur Jiu, the genuine God, created the first man, Haram, and the first woman, Ayo, and placed them far to the west of India in a region called Pipiri. There, a being named Lita tempted them to make rice beer. Then Lita enticed them to pour part of that beer on the ground as an offering to Satan. And Haram and Ayo became drunk on the rest of the beer and slept. When they awoke, they knew they were naked and felt ashamed. Skrefsrud marveled at the biblical parallel in Kulian's story. But there was more. Ayo later bore Haram 7 sons and 7 daughters, who married and founded 7 clans. The clans migrated to a region called Kroj Kaman, where they became corrupted. Thakur Jiu called mankind to return to him. When man refused, Thakur Jiu hid a holy pair in a cave on Mount Harata. Note the resemblance to the biblical name Ararat. Then Thakur Jiu destroyed the rest of mankind with a flood. Later, descendants of the holy pair multiplied and migrated to a plain called Sasan Beda, mustard field. There, Thakur Jiu divided them into many different peoples. A branch of mankind, which we shall call Proto-Santal, migrated first to Jarpi land, and then continued eastward from forest to forest until high mountains blocked their way. Desperately, they sought a way through the mountains, but every route proved impassable. at least to their women and children. Not unlike the children of Israel in Sinai, the people became faint on their journey. In those days, Kolian explained, the Proto-Santal, as descendants of the Holy Pair, still acknowledged Thakur Jiyu as the genuine God. Facing this crisis, however, they lost their faith in him and took their first step into Spiritism. The spirit of these great mountains have blocked our way, they decided. Come, let us bind ourselves to them by an oath so that they will let us pass. Then they covenanted with the Maramburu, spirits of the great mountains, saying, O Maramburu, if you release the pathways for us, we will practice spirit appeasement when we reach the other side. Skrefrudz, no doubt, had thought it strange that the Santal name for wicked spirits literally meant spirits of the great mountains, especially since there were no great mountains in the present Santal homeland. Now he understood. Very shortly, Kolian continued, they came upon a passage, perhaps the Khyber Pass, in the direction of the rising sun. They named that passage Bain, which means day gate. Thus the Proto-Santal burst through onto the plains of what is now called Pakistan and India. Subsequent migrations brought them still further east to the border regions between India and the present Bangladesh, where they became the modern Santal people. Under bondage to their oath, but not out of love for the Maramburu, the Santal began to practice spirit appeasement, sorcery, and even sun worship. Kolian added, in the beginning, we did not have gods. The ancient ancestors obeyed Thakur only. After finding other gods, day by day we forgot Thakur more and more until only his name remained. In this present age, it is said by some, Kolian continued, that the sun god is Thakur. Therefore, when there are religious ceremonies, some people look up to the sun and speak unto Thakur. But the forefathers taught us that Thakur was distinct. He is not to be seen with fleshly eyes, but he sees all. He has created all things. He has set everything in its place, and he nourishes all, great and small. How does Skrefrudz respond? Some missionaries, to be sure, have responded in similar situations by saying, forget this being you think is God. He can only be the devil. I will tell you who the true God is. Such arrogant reactions have often quashed the potential responsiveness of entire peoples. I think that's a big statement right there. I do understand some people balking that this is not a one-to-one representation of the biblical context, right? I get that. But think of a people, an ancient people group like this, who don't have a written history. It's an oral tradition that's been passed down to them for thousands and thousands of years. I mean, they're talking pre-flood, right? And in 1867, this guy brings them something, and that there is enough there that there are enough parallels to draw there. He is the unseen God, but he sees all. You can't see him with fleshly eyes. He created all things. He has set everything in its place, and he nourishes all, great and small. And by the sounds of him, he's a good God, right? I think we need to be kind of cognizant of that. You know, you may not want to jump on the bandwagon and go, oh, it's the same guy. But if you're working with someone that has that as their background, you've just been given something to work with. Work with it. Don't try and debunk it necessarily. Work with it. Work with the commonality. Work with the thing that is familiar to them, And similarly, this is, and here's a reason why. This is a good example, and this is going to be a shorter read. The first missionaries that came to China and to Korea had similar experiences. The Catholics went to China, but they weren't doing so well. And then they came to Korea, and they were insisting, like the Chinese wanted to call him Shang Ti, The Chinese call him Shang-Ti, the Lord of Heaven. Some scholars speculate that Shang-Ti may even be related linguistically to the Hebrew term Shaddai, as in El Shaddai, the Almighty. I don't know about that. I'm sure Dr. Heiser and his crew would probably disagree with that. Just because they sound alike doesn't mean it's related. In Korea, he is known as the Hananim, the Great One. Belief in Shang-Ti and Hananim predates Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism by an unknown number of centuries. In fact, according to the Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics, Volume 6, page 272, the first reference in Chinese history to any kind of religious belief specifies Shang-Ti alone as the object of that belief. The antiquity of that reference, an estimated 2,600 years before Christ. That is more than 2,000 years before Confucianism or any other structured religion arose in China. That's a long time. And so here's the thing is like the Catholics, when they got there, they started insisting on calling him by their names. They were trying to say, no, he's not Shang-Ti, he's not Shang-Ti. And they weren't getting very far with the Chinese. They weren't using that commonality of the great God, right? On page 67, it says, at times they took pains to emphasize that this foreign God was like no God which Chinese or the Koreans had ever heard of before. Those who took this position completely misunderstood the situation. They also missed the real point of their own ministries. Those who employed Shang-Ti usually did not exploit the full potential of that name by evoking its very ancient association with China's origins. And so here on the following page, following through, Protestants explained that Hananim, this is for the Koreans, had laid the groundwork for a future reconciliation with repentant peoples by revealing himself in new ways to one people, the Jews. He chose the Jews not because they were greater in number or better in quality than other peoples, but simply because he needed a specific lens to focus a new revelation of himself upon the screen of human history. He also gave that revelation in actual written form through specific men, Moses, the prophets, and the apostles. Most important of all, he incarnated his own son among the Jews, Jesus, the Messiah, the eternal Logos, the only righteous man, died for the sins of all people, and then rose from the dead, proving to all men that Hananim accepted his atonement. He then commissioned messengers bearing good news of redemption to all peoples, calling all peoples to repentance and faith in the name of Jesus, Son of Hananim. I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And I had not really thought of that before. So for me, these were challenging books, because maybe had I done this 10, 15 years ago, I might go to those places and say, oh no, let's just, we don't call him that. We call him Yahweh. And the funny thing is I'm an American. I'm calling him by a Hebrew name, right? Maybe I'd say Lord or God. It's just like linguistic nuance there, right? I mean, we hear that from Dr. Heiser all the time. He's always talking about grammar spasms. Well, maybe sometimes we need to unspasm it in a way. And then sometimes God works in these ways in kind of really interesting, I dare to say supernatural ways. I think supernatural means can happen in different formats, and this is one of them. We all remember the story of Balaam's donkey. This is sort of like the opposite, but kind of cool. I like this. So this is about the Lahu people of Burma, in the Burma region around 1904. Again, this is maybe 2.5 pages. It was during the initial stage of the Lahu response to the gospel that Pu Chan, God's advocate among the headhunting Wa people. Okay, so they were going to the headhunters of this region. Kind of scary, right? Saddled the little pony and told his disciples to follow it in search of a white brother bearing the book of Sia, the true God. So there's several in this book. They have these ancient stories, these folklore stories of a white brother coming with a book of truth. This is not the only people. The Santal people was one. There's other examples. So they saddled a donkey, a little pony, and said, follow the pony, looking for a white brother. Probably much like myself. The pony led those amazed disciples over approximately 200 miles of mountainous trails and down into the city of Giftings. Then it turned into the gate of a mission compound and headed straight for a well. The pony stopped beside the well. Puchan's disciples looked in all directions but could see no trace of either a white brother or a book. Nelda Widland, daughter of Vincent Young and granddaughter of William Marcus Young, told me in person what happens next. For she was raised on that very mission compound and drank often from that very well. The details which follow form a treasured memory of the entire Young clan. The Wa tribesmen heard sounds in the well. They looked inside it and saw no water, but only two clear blue eyes looking up at them out of a friendly bearded white face. Hello, strangers, the voice, speaking in the Shan language, echoed out from the well. May I help you? William Marcus Young climbed out of the well, which was not yet in use. He was still in the process of digging it. As he brushed the dust from his hands and faced them, the Wa messengers asked, Have you brought a book of God? Young nodded. The Wa men, overcome with emotion, fell at his feet and blurted out the message from Puchan. Then they added, This pony is saddled especially for you. Our people are all waiting. Fetch the book. We must be on our way. Young stared at them. I can't leave, he replied. Thousands of Lahu come here almost daily for teaching. What shall I do? Young presented the situation to Lahu Christians. Together, they decided to provide accommodation for the Wa men so they could receive teaching in Giftings and make trips back to the Wa territory to teach their own people. By this means, Puchan and thousands of his people became Christians without a single visit from William Marcus Young. As a result of this arrangement, little Vincent Young, Nelda's father, grew up hearing the Wa language spoken around him almost as much as Lahu. Later, as a teenager, Vincent made repeated journeys into the Wa mountains, in an area avoided by travelers because of the Wa reputation for headhunting, and provided more detailed teaching on location. As a result of such visits, Vincent learned the Wa language so thoroughly that he later followed up his translation of the Lahu New Testament with a second New Testament in Wa. The Youngs and the Karen colleagues, in addition to baptizing about 60,000 Lahu, soon found themselves with another 10,000 baptized Wa converts, who in turn spread the gospel still further in eastern Burma and southwestern China. At the end of my interview with her, Miss Widland said, Don, would you like to meet my father, Vincent Young, and see an ancient photo of my grandfather took of that little Wa pony with a saddle on its back? Do you mean to tell me your father is still living? I exclaimed. He's now 80 years old and lives in Mentone, California, just a few miles from here, she replied. Later, I met with her father's humble dwellings in Mentone. She introduced me to Vincent Young himself, who in turn showed me not only the photo of the pony, but also album after album of other ancient photos as well. There stood William Marcus Young at various stages of his life and ministry, and the Karen men and women who worked for them. I saw hundreds of Lahu and Wa standing in the shadows of rivers, waiting to be baptized, while still other thousands blackened surrounding hillsides to observe the baptism. I drank in the triumph of it all until my heart felt ready to burst. Hallelujah. Does anyone doubt that God could cause a pony to lead these Wa men so unerringly over so great a distance? Sure, Surely the God who used a star to lead the Magi to the manger in Bethlehem could use a mere pony to find a certain well in Kentung. I think that stuff is cool. And if God is the same today, yesterday, today, and forever, then what pony is he leading now? You know, God is doing something in your life. If you've listened this far through all these stories, if you've listened this far, it's because God is drawing your attention. He has always prepared works before you, but perhaps now he's directing more of your attention towards them. In 2 Corinthians 4:16 through 18, again, the Amplified. Therefore, we do not become discouraged, spiritless, disappointed, or afraid. Though our outer self is progressively wasting away, yet our inner self is being progressively renewed day by day. For our momentary light distress, this passing trouble, is producing for us an eternal weight of glory, a fullness beyond all measure, surpassing all comparisons, a transcendent splendor and an endless blessedness. So we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are unseen. For the things which are visible are temporal. They're just brief and fleeting. But the things which are invisible are everlasting and imperishable. So I want you to be cognizant of the opportunities that God presents to you. Not only are the opportunities to experience the kingdom here, but also to please God and reap the rewards at the judgment seat of Christ. This is the good judgment. This is not the bad judgment. This is the one where we're given the rewards for our efforts that we've done here on this earthly life. And these will last forever. And it's not selfish to go after those, right? These are good rewards, right? Jesus said in Matthew 6:19 through 21, do not store up for yourselves material treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart, your wishes, your desires, that on which your life centers will be also. That verse right there can be used so many ways. So many ways. So again, like I said earlier, start with your family first. That is your first mission field. You know, if they're already believers, great. Be a good servant to them. Love them. Love your spouse like they are the daughter of the king. Love them like God is your father-in-law. Remember, you are playing the long game. You are running a race. Plan for the marathon, not a sprint. Be willing to be one of the middle cogs. You don't have to see the end. You'll see it later. You don't have to reap the harvest right then. Sometimes you're just out there watering. You know, you got to water. That's most of it. Husbands, treat your wives like God is your father-in-law. We just kind of covered that. Will he hear your prayers if you're treating her poorly or unkind? Think about that. How real is that? You know, you can be going to him, tell him he's wonderful, he's great, but if you're not treating his daughter very well, don't you think he's going to be saying to you, yeah, listen, I know you think I'm great and all, but why are you treating her horribly? Like, start treating her well. And it's going to please me that you're treating my daughter or even your children, treating your children so well. Wives, the same. Treat your husbands like God is your father-in-law. Will he hear your prayers if you're treating him disrespectfully or dismissively? Women, you know, you got to do your part in the respect aspect as well. This is your first mission field. Get that stuff straight and then start moving. So again, in the comments section, if you feel so led, like this could be personal. So if you don't want to, that's fine. But tell me in the comments section how you can be better in your role at home. Start with your comments section and all caps, home, HOME, and then tell your story. Home is your game day, training day. Then we're going to take it to the rest of the world as you leave your home. So may your lives be reflective of that. Let's start using this knowledge to be doers and not just hearers. But let's get our priorities straight. Let's get our heart aligned with God's purpose. Let's move in the giftings that He's given us. And let's understand that He can do big things, and it's not all in us. We just have to be willing to take that step. We just have to be willing to be obedient and move in the direction that He's leading us. All right. So let's do this.